Well, Jeff, welcome to the Journey of Life. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Anjana. I'm delighted to be with you.
I wanted to tell the viewers a little bit about who you are. So, Jeff Vander Clute sees through complexity to the illuminated possibilities. He's passionate about empowering people to find their way during these times of challenge, disruption, and unprecedented opportunity. In his coaching and mentoring practice, Jeff works with the technologies of higher consciousness to bring clarity and love to situations and to accelerate spiritual awakening. Gene Houston has called Jeff a modern day Merlin, and indeed, he delights in co creating magic with those who are in service to the great work of collective healing and enlightenment. I'm delighted, Jeff.
Me too. Thanks again.
So, Jeff, we've been going through a very strange, disruptive time to the so called normal that we had before. And you've been exploring a lot of this new normal in 2020. Could you tell us a little bit about these explorations?
Absolutely. Well, it started when I was in India, interestingly, in March, right before the pandemic was officially declared. And it occurred to me to have an intuitive conversation with the coronavirus to see if maybe it was bringing some gifts. And sure enough, well, I had this sense of a presence, and then I very quickly was getting kind of visuals and other impressions of the gifts of the virus. And one of them being slowing us down, another being, I'll say, inspiring us to create networks of support and mutuality. And indeed, the new economy is emerging. We maybe don't see it yet fully or even much at all, but it's happening. And so there are many benefits. And in the long run, um, this is maybe challenging to hear, but more lives will be saved because the web of life is being strengthened. So we're going through a difficult initiation, and it is difficult, and many people are struggling, and very sadly, a large number of people won't be with us on the other side. So it's a difficult paradox, and I want to be clear to honor that it is a difficult time. It's a difficult time for humanity. And my heart goes out to everyone who's been touched and who is really feeling the challenges. And at the same time, it's like it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Well, the best of times side of the coin is that humanity is waking up, and that is something that many of us have been hoping for a long time. And we needed a disruption to shift us from our patterns that were deeply entrenched for a long time, so that something new could emerge through, you could say, the cracks in the pavement. It's like the little green shoots, the grasses and other new growth that can come in where the old system is breaking down. So there's the notion of break down to break through. There's a lot of good language, but now we're not just talking it, we're living it. And I was, again, intuitively exploring the nature of the old, or you could say the preceding paradigm. And I have no ill will towards the past and the ways in which humanity has organized itself historically, because we've been learning all along. We've learned some things that don't work, but we've also learned a lot that does work, which we're going to carry forward. So just so that we have a starting point, the first thing that came to me about the pattern that we were in for hundreds of years, really, is that society was organized primarily around the merchant archetype. So society was organized around buying and selling primarily. So all domains of life, education, art, medicine, you name it, sports, all were commercialized in some sense. And that was the experiment that society was running. And it wasn't wrong. It did mean, though, that people who weren't naturally that inclined to engage in transactions and buying and selling activity felt marginalized. And yet we needed to find a way to exist within society. So those of us who were different kind of shoehorned ourselves in as best we could, and didn't maybe feel authentic in doing so, but you've got to put food on the table, right? So there was that archetype, and other archetypes over millennia have been prominent. So for instance, in ancient Greece and Sparta, society was organized around the warriors, and Athens around the intellectuals. I'm not a historian, but generally speaking, let's say, the Brahmins have been very prominent in the past, the priestly class or caste in different parts of the world. Now, it's not about one archetype stepping forward and kind of dominating all the rest. Now it's a time of freedom where we actually need to discover who we are authentically and be that and do that. That's the number one key for thriving in the new pattern I've been exploring. The key is for thriving now, which includes clarity and health and well-being. Number one is to know who you are, and that's spiritual wisdom as well. Know thyself, who am I? And also, once you know who you are, do that. Do what you love.
Yeah.
And in the process, you'll do it very well. And interestingly, this is where the new economy emerges, because there are already experiments that are working for businesses that are focused on their love to, you could say. They meet up with other businesses that have a different love to, and ecosystems form in which the inputs and the outputs connect. And it's a distributed, decentralized, very resilient economy. And this is what's in the process of emerging now, and it'll take some time. This is an exciting decade. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's interesting that July 5th was the date when I could feel, like physically and in other ways, that we officially entered the new pattern. Right. And I'd be happy to share more about the keys and insights, but that at least gives you some background.
Thank you. So essentially, what you're saying is that the new pattern that has emerged will allow people to live their reality of who they are, and the ecosystem will work where diverse realities then come together and form that strong, cohesive ecosystem that then serves this new archetype that we're going to be looking at. This essentially speaks a little bit to your writings recently about the new operating system and the values around that, the new sort of, how do we align ourselves to that new operating model? So could you talk a little bit about how can we align ourselves to the new pattern so that we can experience the joy and the success that is now available in this new way of life?
Absolutely. Well, again, it starts with authenticity. And I'll share a few of the other keys to aligning. And it is about alignment, because in this new pattern, there are strong principles, there are currents of life that we can not only align with, but actually enter. So it's like we're then floating down the river in the middle, having a much easier time than if we're struggling or trying to hold on to the banks of the river. Mm-hmm. So to be more specific, the second key is radical transparency. So once we know who we are, and once we have the courage to be who we are, then that also means to speak up and say our truth, and our truth on the inside as well as the outside. And that doesn't mean we need to be forcefully transparent all the time, but it just means when it's called for, share, be vulnerable, be open. It's okay. It's actually safe now in a way that it wasn't before. And the culture shift is continuing, and we can be very grateful for the social justice movements that are bringing us into a higher state of consciousness, actually, as we consider the impact of our actions. The third key is offering what you love. And I spoke about that, your love to, doing what you love to do. And it will work. If you're a merchant, do that and you'll be successful in the new pattern. If you're an artist, do that and you'll be successful in the new pattern. The starving artist idea, we can let go of. We have to be awake and pay attention to notice how life is moving so that we can participate in the flows of abundance. I'll give you a few more. Openness to new possibilities, very important. In fact, as I tuned in intuitively before our conversation, I sensed that there were three keys that would be most important for your audience. One being openness to new possibilities, another being trusting life, and then availability to the timeless.
Mm.
When it comes to trusting life, this is fundamental in the realization of how life actually works, where you are one with life, and on a deep, deep, deep level, you are life. And when you can drop into the roots of your being and know yourself as life, your decisions have great power for you at the personal level, and also for your communities, your families, the businesses that you might be involved in. You can be an incredibly beneficial presence. Now, trusting life, therefore, becomes almost equivalent to trusting ourselves. So trust,
Mhm.
trust, trust. And when we trust life, because life is mirroring us to ourselves, trust is what's mirrored back. So life demonstrates its trustworthiness. So it's a really good idea, even if it isn't what we're used to take the step, take the leap, and trust life. Give it a go, because as one becomes coherent in trust of life, life works so much better. It really does.
Mm.
And in the process, if we're going to know the roots of our being, that's where availability to the timeless comes in. So we make ourselves available to our own vastness, our own depth, that part of ourselves which is not within space and time, but in some ways is cradling the local self, the
Mhm.
physical body and mind and all of that. And then we can align when we're loving all of ourselves and we're connected with all of ourselves. We can align our local and you could say non-local selves, which leads to tremendous manifestation power and
Mhm.
capacity to manifest as long as it's in alignment with life.
Mhm. Mhm. What prevents us, Jeff, from trusting and, and really giving ourselves to that vastness of potential for all of us? What prevents us from doing that?
Well, for one, it's not what we've grown up believing in most cases.
Mhm.
You've got very enlightened parents, it'll be a different story. And in the future, indeed, there will be many very awake parents and very awake children. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the world unfolds at that point. But we're now, and now is all there is anyway. So um, the second point is that it's not only that we're not accustomed to it, it's because we've held life with mistrust and um, and have been defended against life.
Mhm.
Well, the mirroring mechanism of Maya shows us that mistrust and shows us, or distrust, and shows us where we're defended. So we experience life as problematic, which then furthers our sense that we can't trust life. So we have to break this cycle.
Mhm.
And we do that by deciding, we've tried it the other way and it hasn't worked very well. So let's try it this way.
So it's what you're saying is trust begets trust. So when you start trusting, life reflects that trust back, and then as you have that positive experience, obviously your confidence grows in that trust, and you continue to then manifest that. How about channeling into the vastness that is you, and the opportunity of you being your entire self and experiencing that largeness of your being, right? So I think the trust bit totally comes into that, because you're trusting yourself to be you, to really speak up transparently when you have to, but then also keying into that vastness. How can we manifest that in a better way as human beings?
Well, when we slow down, which is the first gift of the coronavirus, and stop trying so hard, then inklings will come to us for what might be the inspired thing to do. And when we notice and listen and act in accordance with our inspiration, then beautiful things happen. And these beautiful things are coming from the depths of our being, from that vastness. And the more we show up in life in this way, the more we actually show up as our vast selves. And
Mhm.
our sense of identity expands and expands and deepens even more, and it deepens infinitely and beyond. And our actions then have a tremendous power, the
Mm.
power of love, really.
Mm.
And this is the power also to heal and the power to uplift. Uh, people around you will actually start having awakening experiences without you having to try to convince them that there's a more conscious way to live. It will just happen.
Mm.
So
This
getting
really
out of the
resonates.
way
Yeah.
actually is, it's very simple, except it's not simple for the, you could say, the ego or the small self, which is used to um, sustaining itself through incessant activity and defense mechanism. So we have to surrender. Maybe
Hmm.
that's the word, surrender.
Mm. You know, it's incredible. It's this, the words that you're saying are really resonating. You know that I had a recent loss in my life of an uncle that I was very close to, and I was quite devastated by that loss, even though we knew that it was coming. But I was reading some of your earlier writings about this unprecedented times, and the fact that you've written about immortality, right, in certain ways. And I really wanted to explore that with you because a lot of us are facing loss of loved ones through this coronavirus, times, to coronavirus and to other things. We face losses in many different ways, right? People are losing their identities as they lose their jobs, because your identity may be tied to your job, right? You may be losing other things that you held precious to yourself. So I wanted to bring it back to the discussion around immortality, and have you explore that a little bit further.
Well, immortality is a vast topic, and it's also quite simple. This is just what's coming to me now. So let's see, as we follow this stream, when we deepen and expand and find our non-local self and being, then that is not perishable.
Mm-hmm.
And our identity shifts as we practice surrendering, getting out of the way, letting life move through us.
Mm-hmm.
It is us that's moving through us, but it's the deeper us that we haven't been identified with. So maybe this isn't for everyone. If you're already awake, great, help others. But if you're identified with your job, the best thing you could possibly do would be to consciously release that identity. But how, right? How do we do that? Our upbringing and everything have encouraged us to be identified with roles in society and with functions. And there are good reasons for that. But if we could fulfill our roles and functions without identifying with them, that's ideal. And then when we lose our job or whatever it might be, it's certainly easier because we don't have the sense of having lost anything.
Mm-hmm.
We've, in some ways, we've gained the greater part of ourselves because our focus can come back to exploring that which always is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a it's it's a delicate art, and there's a certain amount of appropriateness in society. We don't run around saying, well, it's no big deal that you lost a relative. It is. For the human self, it's a big deal. And that's also part of the beauty of life. So we celebrate the cycles. We celebrate the comings and goings, both of which can be a lot easier when we have a vaster perspective. Now, in terms of maybe the radical possibilities of
Mm-hmm.
immortality, there's every reason to believe that the human vessel can live a lot longer than it currently does. The human body, some scientists are saying, needn't die after 80 years or 200 years. And in the Indian tradition, there's the Satya Yuga, which is a time, it's like a golden age when humans lived maybe 20,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that it's necessary to live 20,000 years. However, I have a sense that we will quickly discover the keys to radical health and longevity, where by engaging in certain practices, we can rejuvenate,
Mm-hmm.
we can recover from even very frightening illnesses that today tend to be fatal,
Mm-hmm.
and we can live as long as we choose.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a form of immortality within the physical vessel, because really it's up to us. And then we can decide when we're complete. Or maybe it isn't that we decide when we're complete, only because that deep life moving in us is saying, hey, there's another possibility available to you now. And so maybe we leave this vessel, we lay down the body so that our permanent soul self can move into another experience that requires a different vehicle.
Mm.
And so in that way, immortality is one vehicle to the next vehicle to the next vehicle. And we can be conscious enough that we don't forget
Mm.
this deeper dimension of being. And we may remember past lives. We may remember what it's like not to be in a body. People have these experiences now. It's not a fantasy that I'm hoping for. When I meditate, I get all kinds of information, and I feel like I'm very much in my eternal, undying, and also unborn self. But it's one thing for me to say this, it's another for you to experience it.
Mm.
And all of us are invited to practice through meditation and in other ways connecting with our infinite being, our immortal soul, and we will find it if we're persistent
Mm.
and not too distracted by the day to day. And the pandemic is a great time to be exploring. Um, in fact, there's an evolutionary imperative to do so because the new humanity is an awakened humanity. So in as much as we become more conscious, more awake in our day-to-day lives, we're aligned with life. And then life says, here's somebody I can work with. And so we receive energy, we receive vitality,
Mm.
support in all kinds of forms. And that helps us to thrive. And that's what I'm focused on, is how do we thrive? And thriving for me is a synonym for enlightenment, enlightened being.
Mm. It's exciting to delve into this area because when I read the Hindu philosophy goes into Upanishads, which I was exploring as I was preparing for the last sort of few moments with my uncle, and one of the sayings of Upanishads is Tat Tvam Asi, right? So it means thou art that, which is that you as a soul are one with Brahma, or with the big universe. And that, that concept of being one with the big whole uh, also brings to the connectivity of all human beings to one another and to this entire universe. So, when you talk about slowing down, meditating to connect with yourself, and enabling that goodness from the universe to actually pervade your being, which leads then to the vastness that and the abundance that you were talking about earlier. So it's
Yes.
really, I mean, I think this is the time with the new resetting for all of us to do that. And actually, life is enabling us to do that because of the slowdown. So it's really interesting. You've also written about the journey of homecoming. What are some of the paths that people can take to complete that journey? So first of all, what is the journey of homecoming, and then how can people get on that path?
Well, the journey of homecoming is a journey of remembering who and what we are, remembering that which we are. And the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads, the four great sayings, maybe more, I think there are four though,
Yeah,
all more or less say you are that. You are Brahman, I am that, I am, very awake and one with all. And um, that is what happens inevitably on the spiritual path. You will find, if you seek, you will find. So you will cross the proverbial finish line of homecoming. You will find yourself. And when you find yourself, you will be amazed and shocked at first because of all the unconsciousness that has been. It's so apparent, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how I was even 2 weeks ago, but
Mhm.
it's okay. We're evolving, we're growing, we're transforming. It's a beautiful process. And so in some sense, the process continues as long as we're in a physical body indefinitely. So there's always more. It's not like there's one finish line and you cross it and I'm complete and let's go drink a beer. The journey is always continuing as long as we're in embodiment. But we reach a point where we're very clear who and what we are.
Mhm.
The meaning of the Mahavakyas is self-evident to us, and that's the key. It's obvious. It's not a philosophy anymore. It's not something that we hope is true and believe because rational arguments make the case. Like, we just know it in our gut, and it's beyond belief. And so when we've gone beyond belief to direct knowing of truth, then that's home, you could say. And home is an interesting place. There's a lot more to do once you're there. It's not game over, it's actually game on. We're just getting started. So in terms of the journeys, it's interesting. I'll tell you the story of how they came to me. I was on a flight, I was in Australia, to Melbourne to offer a one-day workshop on awakening your spiritual gifts. And this is an area that I love, helping people to tap into their siddhis, their powers, and to be empowered, not just for the sake of being powerful and maybe a little bit like the X-Men or the other superheroes that you might see in a movie, but really deeply who you are as a powerful being. And for that power to be expressed, because then we can show up as healers, as people who can, well, change the world in beautiful ways with that power. And as long as we don't own our power, then it's challenging to really be alive, frankly. So I'm very interested in love as power and the right use of true power. So I'm on the way to this workshop, and somehow it occurred to me to ask the question intuitively. I call it sourcing. So I started to inquire and source some information. And I was sourcing in response to the question, well, what are the spiritual paths that work at the end? It's like there are stages. It's like a relay race, different. And you may have had the experience in your life that you read a certain book in the beginning and there's a certain level of spirituality that you accessed and it was fantastic and it opened many doors. And then you reached a threshold and you crossed that threshold and maybe different books, different teachings became central for you. And that process can iterate a few times. So I was curious, what are the paths and what are the practices at the end that work? And maybe not just at the end, but at that moment, I wanted to know what gets us to and across the finish line. So then I started to hear in some inner way the different paths, simple one-word answers. And I had a sense there would be 12 of them, 12 being a sacred number. And I'll tell you what they are. I'll just give them all to you, and then we can explore a few. The first one that came was joy. So there's a sense of a journey of overflowing joy. Imagine that your life is about showing up with joy and spilling that joy out into the world. And as you do, you become more awake. Somehow there's an alchemy. Do the thing that you're here to do and you become more awake. So other paths, power, and again, that's love as power, peace, creating, especially creating beauty, remembering wholeness, the journey of relationship, the journey of exploring the divine in form and formlessness, the journey of ascension, of embodying truth, of laughing. So you've heard of laughter yoga. It is a spiritual practice and it's very healing. For some people, it's important that laughter is in the middle of their mandala of spiritual practices for some reason. And then we have glory and accessing wisdom. So I was curious because I'm guinea pig number one. I always have to try things out on myself first, otherwise it's not authentic. Like, who am I to say what your path might be if I haven't even explored it for myself? Well, what came to me was power. And at that moment I said, okay, I will own this. I will say full yes to bringing forth the power that is within and sharing that power in beautiful ways that uplift many, many people. And when I did that, very quickly my life accelerated. It was already good. I was already in a flow, but I went very much to the next level quickly when I said yes to power. Now, I found that everyone has one journey that's in the middle of your mandala of spiritual practices. And when that pillar is in place, you can have all the others. So I can have joy, I can have peace and creativity and relationship and ascension and glory and all kinds of great stuff. But the puzzle doesn't fit together coherently unless the right central axis is in place. So I intuitively tune in for people and I get it's immediate. I'm like, oh, yeah, for this person, it's access. So for you, I had gotten accessing wisdom. We talked about that. And I've got friends who are in all these different categories. And it's really fun to see how people show up when they're aligned with their journey. And the hypothesis, but I feel it's being proven in my own experience and in the experience of others, is, well, okay, keep all of your yoga practices and everything else you do, but be sure if your path is laughter to put laughter in the middle, and let's see what happens. So
Mhm.
this is one way of accelerating humanity's awakening, by helping at this point hundreds and hundreds of people to be aware of what's the central piece. And it's counterintuitive, because we may think, maybe not everyone, that that spirituality is serious, and so like don't put laughter in the middle, but actually laughter is enormously spiritual. Uh, God, you could say, is having a great time, very amused by the reality show of human existence. And if we also are amused and we approach life with lightness, well, so many problems disappear. It's interesting how many of the problems of life are sort of self-created by our attitude about it. And we touched on that earlier in relation to trusting life. So for people who are here to remember their wholeness, that's another, I love them all, but that's another path that comes up quite a bit. It's about integration. It's about finding the parts of ourselves that we've forgotten, maybe disowned, kind of
Mhm.
thrown away because for whatever reason we didn't like that part of ourselves. We have to bring it all back in. We
Mhm.
have to be whole. You don't cross the finish line unless you're whole. Like you can't
Mhm.
cross the finish line as a fraction of yourself. Like you have, and in as much as it's nonlinear and part of us is already home, because that's true, we're already awake, we're already fully enlightened, in fact, but there's some bit that isn't. So you can think of it as also reaching back for that part of ourselves and bringing it home. So once we're consciously aware of being home, then actually we all have a process, maybe individually and collectively, of
Mhm.
remembering and reintegrating not just our individual self, but the whole of humanity and the whole universe, frankly.
Is it possible for people to access, first of all, what their central, you know, theme is, and then is it possible for them, if they are aware enough to understand if they're a fraction versus a whole? I think, look, we are whole beings in ourselves. We are enough as we are, but like you're saying, we leave parts of ourselves through this journey of life in various different places, either discard certain parts of us because we feel like that doesn't fit in, which you're saying in the new paradigm, that actually you don't have to discard any pieces of yourself, that you can be that whole. And once you're that whole and you know what your central sort of, may I call it a superpower?
Sure.
So just for just general understanding, I think it's like, it's that's your superpower, and then everything else manifests around that. If you realize that that's what you can actually give as value to the world, and that's what you have to share, then the joy, and all the other manifestation of themes actually comes together for you. And of course, not everybody is going to have all of it, but if laughter is your central theme or your superpower, then you're saying go for it, and of course,
Yes.
have your whole self available to the world.
Yes.
um you were saying that when you discovered that power was your superpower, right, and it's a power of love, can you talk a little bit more about um you know uh, how you then manifested that in your life? So once you discovered that that was you, how does that manifest into reality and everyday sort of work that you're doing? Does it just automatically happen, or you have to do something special?
Well, let's see, there are a few parts I feel to the answer. So the first is, once I saw that power was and is central to my journey, I saw also the ways in which I and many people um, have distanced ourselves from power. And in spiritual circles, it's common to have a certain level of discomfort with power
Mhm.
because of maybe countless examples of abuse of power that we're aware of, and the separation between spirituality and like the power structures of the world, which was regarded as a wise thing to do at one point,
Mhm.
but had consequences. So when we distance ourselves from power, we disempower ourselves. And I was seeing how, wow, spiritual people aren't in oftentimes positions of power because we chose not to be. We opted out. which means in some ways we opted out of the ability to serve. So it's time to say yes to power. It's time to trust that we will use it wisely. As we become more conscious, we'll use it with greater and greater wisdom and clarity. And also we can trust that life, as long as we've dedicated ourselves to life, life won't let us go too far if we're potentially in a position to misuse a power, or we're not clear on something. Like, we'll be protected. But I would say for me, when I said yes, I used a kind of spiritual inner practice to clarify my commitment and consolidate my commitment, so that there weren't parts of me that were like, not really, I'll sit this one out. So all of me said yes. And I have certain verbal statements that I use to do this. And at the time I was playing with a few different techniques to calibrate, because I intuitively calibrate what percentage, or using different methods to see whether in fact I'm whole or in the fragment, in part. And so when I was satisfied that I'd said a full yes, I finished that process. And very quickly I realized, I discovered empirically that my writing was changing. Like my style and quality of writing shifted very quickly after that. And people were becoming interested in what I had to say. And my coaching and consulting business was growing as a result. And so I could feel that life was meeting me. We were meeting at a higher level. And I attribute that to having said yes to the journey that is central, or the superpower that is central for me.
That is so interesting. Actually, when you and I talked last, and we discussed what my central theme could be, it was the access of wisdom. It was very interesting to me because I had left parts of myself in my journey of life behind. So there was a part of me that really likes connecting with people on many different levels. It's about understanding how the bigger world works. It's bringing positive voices to the forefront. And that was actually the start of the vlog, because I thought that in this time where there is this unprecedented sort of a movement towards a new way of life, that we really needed these positive voices to be amplified. And we needed these different perspectives of people that were, as you said earlier, were not fitting into the mainstream concepts, right? To be brought into the mainstream, because actually they are mainstream, right? So we as a soul, how we live and how do we experience the abundance of life is very much central to our happiness. And in discovering all of that and amplifying that voice, then made me go down this path of connecting with people and really bringing these voices forth. So I have received that blessing, and I think that I'm still early in my journey in manifesting that. But like you said, life does meet you halfway. You don't have to figure it all out yourself. And by just slowing down and experiencing who you are as a person, life starts to meet you. The universe really starts to manifest in the right way. So I have myself experienced that, Jeff. So thank you for leading me down that that
Oh,
road
wow.
and
That's great news. Thanks for
experiencing
sharing.
that
And
power.
thanks for responding in such a powerful way to your superpower.
No, thank you. Um, what are some of your thoughts about this new operating model that is manifesting now, and couple of steps that people could take right now, practically speaking, to go down the path that you've just been talking about?
Well, in terms of the timeline, when we entered the new pattern on July 5th, and I had a wonderful 5 hours of meditation that day, during which I could really feel the changes, the old patterns being released. And interestingly, there were unresolved energies around big wars and so on that I was working with, so that we could move cleanly into the new pattern. So the new pattern came, but that doesn't mean things changed instantaneously. There's a timeline for manifestation. And people who are more intuitive and sensitive may already feel the changes and see them clairvoyantly, perhaps. But you don't have to be clairvoyant to see what's happening. In fact, there's a website called karunavirus.org. Karuna, Karuna, which means
Mhm.
compassion in
Mhm.
Sanskrit. Karunavirus.org has collected over 1,600 stories of incredible things that are happening at the community level, and different organizations that are taking a stand for a more thriving world and coming up with solutions. So anyone can go to karunavirus.org and start reading, and you will be inspired. Now, I have a sense that by the end of the year, and maybe even in November, there will be enough visible evidence in the United States and in the United Kingdom, where I am right now, that in fact, we've turned the corner somehow, and the rules have shifted. And now it's about the things I was saying, the keys for thriving. And it's safe to come out of our houses, hopefully literally and figuratively,
Mhm.
and explore this new pattern. So to align ourselves, I would say turn on our curiosity, because we have a lot to learn. We have a new way of being to maybe remember, because I don't know that it's a completely new way. Maybe in ancient times, this is how we lived in a previous Satya Yuga. But
Mhm.
let's open our hearts also to the possibility that we could actually be entering a golden age. And if we open our hearts to that, then life can show us the way, will show us the way. I'm completely convinced that this is what's happening.
Mhm.
And if a lot of our energy is cycling in fear, it's going to be a slower process. So if we can, through our various practices, retire from the fear game and put that aside,
Mhm.
and begin to trust and practice trusting and be curious and get out and play more, and yes, laugh too, we're going to naturally, like kids learn very quickly how to be in the world. In many cases, without even being told, they just kind of pick it up. So we're going to pick up, as if through osmosis, this new way of being. And it will come very naturally to us, because it is life and we are life, and life is ready for us all to flourish. So it's like picturing a garden with many different kinds of flowers and plants. And it can be a little bit unruly at times, but it's very, very alive. That's the feeling of the world we're moving into, that we're in fact.
Wow, that's a lovely visual. Um, Jeff, I can't let you go without a little bit of meditation
Great.
as well as blessings. I think it would be wonderful for my viewers to be able to experience that.
Well, what do you have in mind? Because there's so many ways we could go with this.
Whatever is resonating with your being right now.
Okay, very good. Well, what comes to me first and foremost is silence,
Mm.
and for us to sit together in presence. And while we are settling in, if you're driving while you're listening to this, keep your eyes open.
Mm.
But let's relax and open our hearts to these beautiful new possibilities, and see our open hearts connecting. This is life connecting with life, activating the new pattern. And this is a pattern of love. Deepen the consciousness of humanity, of the species, this whole organism of all humans. The decision has been made to come home and to make real, to realize love, and to recognize love in everyone, in everything. And when we know directly that love is, and ultimately, love is all that is. Well, the troubles melt away, and we find ourselves in the garden of light, each of us a flower of some beautiful, diverse sort. And it's like the universe winks. And that's the recognition. Welcome home, my friends. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was wonderful.
I loved being here with you today and having the opportunity to explore. This is an exploration that never ends, but very meaningful themes for these times. Thanks for creating the opportunity for so many people to inquire together and find the way.
Well, thank you for thinking through this and bringing us the light and the vision for what the new world looks like. I certainly felt the light, and I could see the garden. So thank you for that positivity.
Oh,
Really,
you're so welcome.
thank you.